Moving on in our agenda, we have the agency updates, which I'm excited to hear about. We'll start first with, what are we going to start with?
I think with CDC.
Ermias? Okay. Well, why would we not start with CDC? I guess we'll do it in alphabetical order. So, Dr. Belay, it's all up to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. I am Ermias Belay. I'm the ex-officio for CDC. I decided to make some slides to make it easier for people to follow with my reports. I'm sorry? The slides are loaded up. Okay. Copies are also in the notebook, is what Nancy is saying. My report will focus on the activities that took place since the last CFSAC meeting. If you recall, there was a time allotted for discussions about the CDC website in the last CFSAC meeting, and based on input we received from the selected committee members and also from patient advocacy groups, we revised the website, and in that revised site was already launched, is up and running on as of May 16, 2012. There's one area that we were not able to review, and that's the toolkit, provided toolkit, and there are reasons for that. In this first revision we were not planning to include the toolkit for a number of reasons, as I said. But we have received inputs, particularly from Eileen Holderman on the toolkit, which we're planning to revise in the next iteration. The toolkit that we're talking about is a provided toolkit that has been printed, so there are hard copies that have been distributed to thousands of providers and state health departments and advocacy groups. It exists in both in English and Spanish, so it would take us time to review that toolkit, but that will happen in the future. The other thing that's pending is the revised web page that's available now will have to be translated into Spanish. So that would also take some time. So the whole site would have to be translated into Spanish and put on the website. So that's pending. That will be done in the future. The other thing that we're planning is to add a section on pediatric CFS, and that's also a plan that we have in the future. I was very delighted to hear about the pediatric CFS session this morning, and we're planning to have a section devoted to pediatric CFS, and that's in the works, but it will take us some time. Hopefully, that could potentially be used to educate educators about pediatric CFS and the challenges and the issues that have to be addressed. And then again, as I said, that will take us some time. The provided toolkit, as you can see on the slide, has been distributed to over 17,000 copies have been distributed to 120 local health departments and CFS organizations and academic centers. And we continue to make available those toolkits primarily as an educational tool for primary care physicians and also public health professionals. It's surprising that how many public health professionals in the country are actually aware of CFS. So we are trying to change that by providing them information through the toolkit. Again, as I said, that toolkit is available both in English and Spanish. Now, you probably have heard about the Medscape roundtable that was launched in March of this year. The title was CFS, the Challenge, Chronic Fatigue Syndrome, the Challenge in Primary Care. And that Medscape was moderated by Dr. Kamarov, and the panel members included Dr. Bettman and Dr. Lab. And as I said, that was launched in March. And since March, between March and May 7, 2012, that roundtable in the Medscape website was viewed over 31,000 times. And clinicians actually went and get credits for CMEs. So you could actually view the information on the website, go through a test that you have to answer to get CME credits. So over 4,600 clinicians have actually viewed it, went through the questions, answers, and qualified for the CMEs. And again, this is only within several weeks of the site being launched. It continues to be available on the website. There is a link for it from the CDC website, and we hope more clinicians will go view it and then qualify for CME credits. Now, staff members from our CFS program continued meeting with patient advocacy groups. This was started about, I would say, about 10 months ago. And since the last meeting, our staff members have met with the advocacy groups that are listed on the slide. About 6 of them. In the dates that the meeting actually happened is also listed on the website. We have found this having this dialogue with patient advocacy groups to be extremely important, and we're finding ways of potentially continuing this dialogue with the advocacy groups in the future. Continuing with the education theme, I had reported at the last CFSAC meeting that there are 2 CME courses that will be available. And the titles of those CME courses are listed on the slide. One of them is CFS Clinical Diagnosis and Management. The team members that are developing that website or that CME course, as you can see it on the slide over there, includes Dr. Jones from CDC, Dr. Klimas, Dr. Bettman, Dr. Ann Vincent, who's at is a member of the committee here, and Dr. I believe it's Luckett. Apologize for mispronouncing it. I'm sorry. I apologize for mispronouncing that. So that CME course, and also the second one, which is CFS and Sleep. The team members are again listed on the slide. They have already been accredited. So they've received accreditation for CME, CNE, and CE. This is for different clinician groups that potentially could get credits for taking those courses. And the anticipated launch dates are also on the slide. For the clinical diagnosis and management, we anticipate launching it on June 20th, very soon. In the CFS and Sleep course would potentially be launched on July 8th, and those are the anticipated dates. And we hope once they are launched to probably make a difference in educating clinicians in this country about CFS and its potential management, diagnosis and management. Now, I'd also mentioned the last CFSAC meeting that we're working with the Center for Advanced Professional Education. That's a company that actually develops what's called standardized patient. They will develop a standardized patient and they will make it available for medical schools. This idea is basically to start incorporating CFS education in medical school curriculum. And that company has a lot of experience in developing those videos that will be available for medical students. So Dr. Casillas, if you need information in the future for students, this will be available. And the vignettes are being produced now and will be available very soon. I don't have a specific date that this will be available, but we're working on it. Moving on to research in other activities, last time I had reported that there was clinical sites that CDC has started funding. And these are 7 clinics, and they are listed on the slide over there. And the idea behind this project is basically to describe the heterogeneity of CFS by looking at patients that are diagnosed and treated in multiple sites. So 7 sites have already been enrolled, and IRB approvals of the protocols have already been finalized. In fact, some of the centers have started enrolling patients. And these are basically patients diagnosed by the physicians independently at the different clinical sites in filling out different questionnaires and forms to collect different types of information. I do not have time to go through the entire proposal, but by the time it's done, we'll have a lot of information on CFS patients diagnosed and treated in multiple sites. And that data will be available when it's finalized. The second research that we're engaged in is a collaborative program with the Blood Systems Research Institute, which is located in California, for pathogen discovery, using what people call metagenomics. This is a new pathogen discovery advanced research tool that's utilized by this institute to basically search for an etiologic agent or an infectious agent in CFS patients. In 50 plasma samples from acute onset CFS patients was shared with that laboratory at the research institute, and they ran 454 sequencing. This is next generation sequencing for pathogen discovery. In their initial run on those 50 plasma samples did not identify any specific infectious agent on those 50 plasma samples. The next step is to use what they call a Lumina platform, which is a more advanced and more detailed, in-depth analysis that would be done again on those 50 plasma samples. Because that was the sample that was available for us. Now, that's a very good point, because that assumes that it assumes a lot of things. It assumes that the agent is in the blood, which may not be the case. It also assumes that it would be in the blood for a long period of time, and that it's in the blood at the time the blood actually is drawn. So it makes a lot of assumptions. So a negative study does not necessarily rule out an infectious etiology for some of the patients. But that was the sample that's available for us. Since the last CFSAC meeting, we had several publications in attendance scientific meetings. They're also listed on the slide. The one that was more interesting, I think, is the first one, which was the experimental biology, which happened in April in San Diego, California. And that poster presentation was actually picked as a hot pick for the press. In that poster dealt with decreased basal ganglia activation in chronic fatigue syndrome subjects. That was a study that CDC conducted in collaboration with Emory University and identified decreased on MRI scans, decreased basal ganglia activation in patients suffering from CFS, which attracted a lot of attention and was presented to the press. On those other meetings are listed on the slide. And these are the publications. There were 3 manuscripts that have been co-authored and authored by CDC researchers that have been accepted for publication. That's my input. I hope I didn't take up a lot of your time, Dr. Marshall.
For the members, we're going to allow questions, but they're going to be fairly limited. So again, I ask you to ask them as direct and focused as you can for Dr. Bilal. Ali?
Well, mine's not exactly direct, but I was just one.
Said as possible.
Okay, because I did want to say a little bit about the follow-up of the CDC website review, if I may. I thought that would be the understanding. It's okay? I'll make it quick. Thank you very much. The advocacy communities, very grateful that CDC has started to make the changes on the website. I haven't gone through all of the changes yet, but just by the fact that they've begun making changes is very optimistic. Our review panel is continuing with Dane, Steve, and Nancy Klimas and Lily Chu. as Ermia said, I had a good meeting with the CDC. We were all at our laptops, and we went through the toolkit word by word, line by line, and they were extremely gracious and attentive and indulgent, really. They really gave me the floor, and I used all advocates' ideas. I drew on, the whole advocacy population's ideas for this toolkit that is very, very important. And Lily Chu also gave comments written. Mine were verbal in a teleconference. And Nancy Klimas has given her endorsement of Lily's written comments. And Steve and Dane may be providing some comments. And finally, I'd like to just say that Dr. Unger and Ermias and John O'Connor of the CDC just really have allowed us to keep this process opened until we get a site that really reflects what the disease is. And I ended it by sending Dr. Unger and Dr. Belay a 5-minute video that the advocate named Giles Meehan from the UK made with a group of international advocates. And it was a very effective video about CFS, and it's on YouTube. And Dr. Unger watched it, and she thanked me for sending it and said that, they appreciate, they can never be reminded enough from patients what the disease is. So that's all I want to say, and thank you. And we hope the toolkit, do you have a date for that? Did you put it in there?
We don't have a date for the toolkit, and thank you for your nice comments, by the way. We've received the inputs from you and also from Dr. Lily Chu, and we'll be incorporating them in our revision of the toolkit, but it would take us some time, but we will do it. I don't have a specific date for you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Susan?
Ask Eileen to clarify what particular aspects of the toolkit are you most concerned about revising?
The whole toolkit.
It mostly is the language and tone.
Well, yes.
I would characterize it.
Yes, we focused on 3 things like we did in the last review: tone, language, and content. Tone and language, from the new changes, we see the biggest changes in tone and language, which is huge. How you say something and what words you choose is huge. Of course, content being even the most important. And, so it's really a combination of all 3 of those. So the toolkit has not been changed in a couple of years. And I think Dr. Unger said it wouldn't be realistic that it would be changed this year, that we're looking at next year. But I was just wondering, like next year, January, or next year, December. That's what I was wondering.
She had said next year. By the way, I have a copy of the toolkit for those of you who are interested. It's a hard copy. It's also available on the website. But in case you want to see it, I have a copy for all of you. But thank you, Eileen, for your input, and everybody else who provided the input.
Ermias, would there be any openness from the CDC to perhaps adopting the primer from IACFS? Instead of, if it's going to take you that long to modify a toolkit that is admittedly very superficial, and I'm not sure how helpful it would be to a provider based on its current form, and I'm not entirely sure our wordsmithing is the most efficient and best way to go about addressing the CDC website, but the primer, and it has its own biases as well from IACFS, is much more comprehensive. It has a lot more information in it than the CDC toolkit, and it would be easy to adopt if there could be some, if the CDC is open to it, and if there could be some qualifying statements, by the CDC saying, we don't necessarily endorse every one of these comments, but it was a collaborative committee that came together of experts in chronic fatigue syndrome and came up with a very, I think, well thought out, again, with its own biases, primer for practitioners. So I'm wondering if the CDC might be open to that.
I haven't read it in its totality, so I have to admit. but we should consider it.
I know a lot of work went into the toolkit, and I just looked at it for the first time last week. And if I was a primary care provider and I was reading this, the thing that would hit me most is cognitive behavioral therapy and the emotional aspects of it. And I don't know that those are appropriate messages for a primary care physician, not knowing about chronic fatigue syndrome, learning about it, because, you know, teaching somebody to get by with their problems, which is all that cognitive behavioral therapy could ever help somebody do, is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's got a full-page emphasis here and 2 pages of a few pages. Graded exercise therapy needs a little work, but it's a good idea. And I'm just concerned, you said 17,000 of these went out? Did I get that right?
It introduces a lot of people who do not know about CFS, about what CFS is.
Yeah.
So it has a lot of positives, and we've received a lot of positive feedback because people had no idea what CFS looks like and how it's described, no information at all. So it has some positives. But if you have any concerns, any issues, please give us your feedback.
You just heard them.
No, from you, in written feedback.
Okay. The concern is, I mean, I've read the primer, and this really will help a primary care physician looking at chronic fatigue syndrome. And when I read the toolkit, it concerns me that it gives the wrong message about it, the thrust. And I know a lot of work went into it, and it's my view when I read it cold and I read this cold, both within a short period of time. And if I'm a physician, want to figure out first what my patient has and then what I can do for it, this has a lot more meat to it. And this has the treatment in here I would take out. The explanations of chronic fatigue and the problems there, that's done okay. This is done far superior. My thoughts.
I think that's a pregnant pause there, Dr. Pillai. Thank you very much.
Can I
Thank you.
just ask one question, Ermias? I know that people at CDC have been part of the XMRV team that's going on in Columbia, from the Columbia University, from Dr. Lipkin. Do you have any further updates on that? I know we heard briefly from Dr. Koh today.
The updates that I can give you,
Yes.
that study has been finalized, but the results are not available to me as a person. So I can't tell you the details, but it will be published in some form very soon, within several weeks, is what I have been told. But I do not have access to all the results because the data is not available at CDC, it's available in Columbia.
As
And
I
there are
understand,
several
they've had a non-disclosure agreement for all the scientists.
So all the scientists who participated signed a non-disclosure agreement that none of them would independently disclose the data.
It's being published as a white paper as opposed to a peer review?
I think eventually it will be published as a
No,
peer
eventually,
review.
but the one in the next few weeks is going to be a white paper.
I think so.
Yeah, that's the way I understand it too.
So I'm sorry if
That's it.
I just don't have that any additional information.
That's the information I was looking for.
Any other questions or comments for Dr. Pillai? All right. Thank you very much. Next one up is Social Security Administration. Which one? Amanda? Sorry, they got me off a little bit, and I said, that's not Amanda, that's Amanda.
Hello, thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you to all the presenters and the patients who spoke today. I appreciate your testimony and your input. I'm with the Social Security Administration and the Office of Disability Programs. And within that office, I work for the Office of Medical Listings Improvement. And our office is in charge of defining the policy for the medical listings, which we use to evaluate disability claims under Title II and Title 16 of the Social Security Act. And my presentation is very short today because what we'd like to do is provide a more detailed update at an upcoming meeting, partially for the benefit of some of our new members to have a true overview of the Social Security disability process and how we evaluate cases involving CFS, and to provide you with some updated data and some current data about current claims involving CFS. So today I just want to remind you that in November, actually it was on the November 9th, 2011 meeting, we provided some data to the committee, so if anyone is interested in that, that is available on the website. And in addition to that, our agency guidance on CFS is in a Social Security ruling. It's on the SSA website. Even if you just do a keyword search for chronic fatigue syndrome, you can find that. And it explains our disability evaluation process and how we evaluate CFS, and documentation, which is especially helpful for disability claims. So just wanted to give you those two reminders, and we really do look forward to providing a more comprehensive explanation of the Social Security disability process and about our evaluation of CFS claims.
Amanda, if we don't already have a good link to that part of your website with the CFS explanations, we can put that on CFSAC.
Sure.
I'm not sure that we do, so we're working to, as you know, working to update our website in general. So let's talk later.
Okay.
Steve?
Yeah. Has the Social Security Regulation 99-2P been revised recently?
Well,
or is that the one on the website?
That's the ruling I'm speaking of. It has not been revised recently.
It doesn't need to be.
That's something we always reevaluate and refresh our guidance, and we certainly can, especially if there was any updates in the medical community, especially about our analysis of what is the definition of CFS and how we evaluate it and what types of medical evidence we need. So as the medical community maybe changes or advances, we therefore then update our policy.
Yeah, that regulation is pretty good for people with chronic fatigue syndrome currently. So if you're going to change it, don't mess it up.
Well, if it's not broken, we won't fix it. And again, we always like to know what is happening in the medical community. We want to stay up to date with that, with our policies and procedures. So thank you. I appreciate the vote of confidence in that.
Other questions for him? Is that the Bert Lance practice, Steve? If it ain't broke, don't fix it?
Yeah, but they do have a problem with the ALJs reading it and following it.
Yeah.
But that can be handled other ways.
Certainly won't argue with you there. The last agency update for this afternoon, the others will be tomorrow, is for the FDA, and Teresa Michelle's here.
Thank you very much. So first and foremost, I'm delighted to introduce to all of you Dr. Keith Hall, who will be serving as the FDA alternate ex officio member of the CFSAC. Dr. Hall is a practicing rheumatologist and senior reviewer in our division at FDA. He holds an MD from Boston University and a PhD in pharmacology from the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy. So prior to coming to FDA 9 years ago, Dr. Hall was a researcher at NIH, where he developed particular expertise in rare autoimmune fever syndromes. And Dr. Hall, could you please stand up and be recognized? I think he was hiding in the back somewhere. With that, we're continuing to develop expertise in ME/CSF among reviewers in the Division of Pulmonary, Allergy, and Rheumatology Products, where all applications in this field now reside. So over the last 6 months, this has included a presentation by an outside expert, Dr. Suzanne Vernon, on the science behind chronic fatigue syndrome. And that was at our monthly scientific and research rounds. We've also distributed copies of the CFS Toolkit, and thank you to our colleagues at the CDC, Dr. Beth Unger and Ermias, who have generously provided those. In addition, we have an ongoing effort to keep division reviewers updated with key research articles, such as the primer, which we distributed, and the minimal data elements for clinical trials that came out of this committee. And we will continue to do that as new research becomes available. So at the last CFSAC meeting in November, I was asked to report on the number of applications for chronic fatigue syndrome that we have active at the agency. We currently have 8 active INDs, or investigational new drug applications, for chronic fatigue syndrome. And for those of you who are not familiar with FDA lingo, an IND is an application to allow clinical studies of investigational products to proceed in humans. In general, commercial INDs are sponsored by companies that want to develop drug products for marketing, whereas research INDs are sponsored by individual investigators or groups of individual investigators who are looking to conduct clinical trials with a product not approved for use. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge the many emails that we've received over the past several months that were by individuals requesting a stakeholders meeting to address unmet health needs of patients with ME/CSF. I'd like to assure you that the FDA Office of Special Health Issues is currently in active dialogue with leaders of this letter writing campaign to try to identify what specific goals such a meeting might entail, and so that if a meeting is held, it could be as productive as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Anyone have questions for her?
So I was either crystal clear or I bored you to death.
Can I ask, are you able to share, I recognize issues with confidentiality, are you able to share anything about the nature of these INDs? We learned about one of them earlier today from industry.
Yes, so if the holders of those INDs wish to step forward and tell you about them, they can do so. You don't want to know what I went through to try to get permission to tell you what I did.
Fair enough. Eileen.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know too much about the letter writing campaign, but I know a little bit about it. And you sounded very open to meeting with the advocates. Do you have like an idea in your mind of what you're looking for, and has that been conveyed to the advocates?
Yes. So first off, let me say that FDA recognizes this is a horrible, awful disease. We hear you. No one could sit through the testimony that we've heard today and at other meetings and not be moved. And believe me, we're all there. We're all physicians. We want to help people. The difficulty that we have is that we need to make sure that whatever we're talking about is something that can be goal-directed. And we're not permitted under the law to discuss applications with anyone other than the sponsor of those applications, except during very specific circumstances, such as if we have an active application in-house that can go to one of our advisory committee meetings. Then the data become public. Other than that, we advise you to go to the direct sponsor to get the information from them. So we are very open to having a stakeholders meeting. We just need to understand what the goals of that meeting would be and make sure that it's something that we can do, that's not outside of the purview of our agency or would be better served by, say, an NIH committee or this CFSAC group.
So let me ask you a question that sounds like something you said was a bit of a conundrum. You had to go through hoops to tell us how many. You can't tell us anything about them, but we need to go to the sponsors to get more information. How will we know what the sponsors are? Indeed.
So if there are sponsors out there, usually those drug companies are very vocal, and you know they're out there. We've certainly heard from people today. Clinical trials are all on clinicaltrials.gov, so if you look up clinical trials for CSF, anything that is a drug trial has to be on that website by law. So you can look that up and go through those routes to get additional information about the clinical trials.
Other questions? Well, we've made up our time plus some.